Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'm going to give you guys an update on the winter bedding that I planted out back in, I think it was September or October time. It was quite late in the autumn. I should have got it in a bit earlier, but this will give you an example of how much it's grown since then, and I'll show you what I'll be doing to improve the soil and just show you how the plants are doing. Now unfortunately it's a very windy day with a lot of noise because I'm next to a busy road, so I'm hoping you can still hear me on the microphone. But this is the bed that I showed you before. As you can see, the primrose is already in full flower. They're looking really nice. Especially some of the ones down here. You can see they've got some really nice colour. They do need a little bit of deadheading. I haven't been back here for a few weeks, but they're looking pretty good otherwise. Now the winter was very harsh. We had about 2 foot of snow here, almost down to -10, and the bad weather really did last for quite a long time. So despite the hard weather, not too much has died off. There has been some casualties down this end. I'm not sure if the soil was worse on this end, but up here the antirrhinum certainly seemed to survive okay. There was a bit of damage. You can see some of the tops here. There was some cold winds kind of dried them out and a bit of frost damage. But these antirrhinums at this end have survived. But as I say, down towards that end, they all seem to have died off. Also, the other plants that died were the calendulas. Calendulas are often hardy here in Scotland, as long as it's not too much more than about -5. As I say, it went below -5, so the calendulas have all died off. So what I've done is I've actually respaced out all the wallflowers. When I was here a couple of weeks ago, the wallflowers originally I'd planted them in between the antirrhinums. There was no space for them with the calendulas in the way, so I've planted them all out now. You can see they're all dotted along, quite nice spacing, and they're just starting to bud up, so these will look really nice soon. And what I will do is if I come back to this site later in the week or later in the year, what I'll do is I'll take some photos of these in full flower, and hopefully I'll get those photos on this video before I publish it, so you can see what they look like when they're actually in flower, because they do look really nice. They're really nice showy plants. There is actually in fact one at the far end I've just noticed, and that one's now just starting to flower. So that gives you a good example of what it looks like when it's just beginning to flower. But as I say, they will get much taller. They can grow about 2 or 3 foot tall once they're in flower, and they should look really quite nice. So what I need to do in this video is I need to improve the soil. So I've got multi-purpose compost here, just some very cheap compost, because it's just for improving the soil, it's not for growing the plants in. But you can see here the soil's very dry, very dusty. It really needs a lot of improving to it. It's already a lot better than it was when I first started here, but the soil definitely needs some more compost to help with the richness of the soil, because at the moment, as I say, it's very dry, so compost will help lock in some more moisture, also help break it up a bit, because originally this was quite heavy clay, and there's still a few lumps here and there which are still quite big and quite hard, so I'll need to add compost to help break them up, and it will feed the soil as well. But in addition to compost, I will be adding some feed. I'm adding bloodfish and bone, which is the slow release organic fertilizer, which I find does quite well. And being bloodfish and bone, the blood aspect is the nitrogen, which breaks down the fastest, so you get quite a high nitrogen boost when you first put it in, and then later on the phosphorus and the potassium comes out, with the phosphorus being the last thing because the bones take the longest to break down. But it seems to do quite well because that encourages a lot of green growth early on in the season, and then once the plants get to a decent size, then the potassium kicks in and you get some nice flowers. So I'll be putting that into this soil as well. And if you'll show you down towards this end, which seems to be the worst kind of soil, which is maybe why some of the plants died off, there's some more of these larger clumps here. I'll see if I can find some, give you an example of what it was like. That kind of yellowy colour there, that's more the heavy clay, and you can see it's really very solid. So I'll definitely be working in some compost into this. Now I won't be digging it thoroughly, because the reason being, I've also got plants in here already. I'm just going to kind of hoe it in or fork it in lightly. I don't want to go in too hard, otherwise I'll disturb the roots of the plants. This end isn't too bad, but certainly up that end there's quite a lot of plants, so I can't give it a really good digging over. But I'll get in as much compost as I can, really enrich the soil, and I'll come back to you once I've done that. So that's all the compost now forked in. As you can see, there's a much darker appearance to the soil. Part of that is because I brought up some of the damper soil from below the surface up to the surface, but also because there's a lot more compost, and you see it's quite a dark compost, so it's dark in the soil. But you can see how loose the soil is now. I mean, I can very easily just dig in with my hands, and it's much more friable, so it basically breaks up into smaller pieces. There's still a few larger pieces, such as this here. More digging would break them up further, but also just general weather, rain, and now we've got some compost, also some worms would break it up, because when you put the compost in the ground, you're really feeding the microbes. All the microbes will then move the compost around the soil and help break it up further. But as you can see, much looser, much more friable, just a much better soil in general. So this will probably stay rich for a few weeks, few months, but I'll probably have to keep adding to the compost, because what happens to soil is generally if you don't add organic matter, the organic matter breaks down and then it just reverts back to what it was previously. But even if I don't touch this now for a year or two, it'll still be better than it was before I added the compost. So the benefits of this will last for quite a few years, probably 2 or 3 years, as I say. So that's all for this soil section. I will show you, however, the planters that I planted up in the end of last winter. So these are the 2 planters that I had planted up previously. As you can see, they're flowering quite nicely. Unfortunately, the perennial cabbage, it was a little bit too hard for it. They can normally take about -5, but it went below -5, as I said, and the snow was there for so long that one of them completely died. This one did survive, started to grow up, but the wind has actually snapped it off at the base now. It's very exposed, this site. So it doesn't look like it's going to flower now, it's probably just going to die off. But the violas have done really well. You can see they've really grown a lot since I last showed you. I haven't been deadheading in these at all. You can see a lot of old seed capsules. So this would actually be flowering a lot better if I had deadheaded it. But this was just the garden that I do occasionally, and I just it's been left all winter just to look after itself, these plants. Haven't been watered or anything, but they've really done well. These will probably give flowers for a few more weeks, and then I'll replace these with summer flowers. Once it gets quite warm, the pansies and violas tend to suffer a bit more, and they need to be replaced with summer flowers. Also, the summer flowers are often a lot showier. But you can see they're quite healthy plants, nicely filling the pot. And possibly in a few weeks' time, if we don't get any weather that's too hot, they might even start to cascade over the edge. So that's all from this video, but I'll give you guys an update when I come to do the summer bedding. And I'll also give you guys an update for when I'm doing this area as well, because I need to put summer bedding in here, especially where there's a few gaps. There will be some summer flowers, so for example the antirrhinums in the middle, they will be flowering soon. They're just starting to bud up, a few of them. You can see here, there's already a few flower buds starting to form. But these won't really flower probably until late May or early June. Right now it's the beginning of May, so there's still a little while. But certainly by early summer, they'll be in flower. The wallflowers will be just finishing. The primroses will have gone over by a week or 2. And then I'll just need to fill in some spaces to replace the plants that are finished flowering, so we can have a nice display over summer.